So far we've talked about changing the way we think about learning. We talked about changing the way we think of the classroom. And then we've talked about changing the way we think about work. So I'd like us to now turn our attention to change at a different scale, change the way in which we address complex challenges in our organizations and in our communities. So to start, I want to tell you about two experiences that I had early in my career. So my first kind of real job after college was on a software development project. And it was 4 big organizations who had come together to develop a software program that they could all use. So 4 different organizations, 4 different histories, 4 different cultures. There were about 500 of us working on this project, budget of about $115 million and 4 years. So they handed us, figuratively and literally, 75,000 pages of functional specifications. And it really was the cookbook. They said, all right, create this and we'll all be good. So 75,000 pages, that's 150 reams of paper. Ream of paper is what, about 3 inches? So picture 35 feet of functional specifications. So it was all spelled out. So we set to work on it, got about 3.5 years in and went to integration testing. So that's where you've created parts of it in all these little pockets and teams, and you put it all together, and it didn't work. And they worked on it some more, and they tried to fix it, patch it together, and it didn't work. It never worked. It has gone down in history as the largest software development failure in history. Quite a resume builder, right? You know, my first job. Luckily, I was low enough that it didn't really matter. So that was kind of one experience about how complex work gets done when you've got multiple organizations, multiple agendas working together. All right, second story. It actually takes place before that. So in the community in which I attended as an undergraduate, it was a community that was experiencing a lot of distress. Economic downturn, the industries that had kind of built it up had moved overseas, completely transformed. So all the problems that went with that over 10, 20 years. So the people of that community knew that they couldn't continue on the track that they were on. They had to seek some sort of change in direction. I happened to pick up an odd job as a flip chart recorder in some of those community meetings. I didn't think much of it. I just knew that was a better job than yard work, the kind of jobs that I normally got. But then I left that community, and when I came back about 5 years later, it was completely transformed. Completely transformed. So that was my second experience. How in the world did a community with, talk about not 4 agendas, dozens of agendas, business, government, schools, so many different agendas, but they aligned themselves to create some sort of sustainable transformational change. So those 2 early experiences really shaped my interest in learning how complex work gets done when multiple organizations are working together. So that's what I want to talk to you about for the rest of my time today and tell you about one of the lessons that we've learned. So to get us started, I'm going to ask you to go on a bit of a journey with me, okay? So this is a journey that we will walk on the same path, but what we will find at the end of it, each of us will be a little bit different because it's a trip down memory lane, okay? So indulge me here for a minute. I'd like you to take yourself back to a time or a place where you are utterly happy, content, safe, all those wonderful things. Are you there? Okay, chances are, if you really did that, that's not the first time you've returned. Those are the kind of memories that we come back to time and time again. So let me tell you about one other person I know and his particular journey back to one of those times. So this is my son, Oliver. He doesn't look like that anymore. He's a surly teenager. So if I could picture him with his eyes rolling when I say something, that's what the picture would look like now. But Oliver was about 8 or 9, so about the age he was in this photo. And I was sitting on the couch after a long day, and he sat down beside me, and he said, "Daddy, you know what I'm thinking about?" I said, "I have no clue, son. But what are you thinking about?" He said, "I'm thinking about Christmas." This was July. It was a Saturday. We'd been working outside. It was hot. So I couldn't imagine why Christmas was on his mind. So I asked him, I said, "Oliver, man, why are you thinking about Christmas?" He said, "I don't know, but I think about Christmas a lot." do, huh? Yeah, I think about Christmas because my brother and I, his brother and I, he and his brother are out of school, and you and Mom aren't working, and we're baking cookies, we're watching family movies, and there's a fire in the fireplace. When I think about Christmas, I feel all warm inside. So even 8 or 9-year-olds like to take trips down memory lane. So why? And believe me, I'm getting to the point here. So when we have these kinds of memories, something magical is at work in our brains. So when we're experiencing them live, so in those times where we feel safe and warm and happy, part of what's going on is we get this happy cocktail of chemicals that kind of wash over our brain. And it makes us feel content and safe. And even in the recalling, so years later, even in the recalling of those memories, we still get a little dose of those 4 chemicals. So those kinds of trips down memory lane are different than standard memory. So we have a special word for them. We call it reminiscing, right? Certain other memories aren't associated with reminiscing. Some memories we want to, kind of put out of our heads. But reminiscing takes us back to those places and times that we like to visit. So there are people, psychologists mostly, who study reminiscing. And Christine Batchko is one of those. And she describes reminiscing like this. We bring the best of the past into the future with us. And there are benefits to reminiscing. When we get those doses of happy chemicals, it kind of shores up our resolve. It alleviates our fears of the present day so we can do better work today when we occasionally take those trips down memory lane. So I wanted to establish the foundation of reminiscing because it helps us understand really the topic of my talk, and that's a different word, but it's called prospection. So prospection probably isn't as familiar to you as reminiscing. It wasn't to me until I learned about it. But prospection is like reminiscing, except prospection is reminiscing forward, okay? So it is when we think of a future event and we attach emotionally to it the way in which we attach to those most precious memories of the past. And those same chemicals get to work. So we are actually able to not only just pre-experience this future event, but we are able to pre-feel it. And the psychologists tell us that there are benefits to that too. So when you can attach yourself to this future event with that kind of emotion, you're much more likely to make it happen. When barriers come in front of you, you figure out a way around those barriers. So you're much more resolved to make that future event come true, and those same brain chemicals are at work. So where I work at Purdue, it's called the Agile Strategy Lab, and we focus on the science of collaboration and agile approaches to making the future kind of unfold before us. So when we talk about strategy, we're talking about pretty high-level kinds of stuff, whether it's a community or whether it's an organization. But figuring out how you make strategic change is kind of what we focus on. So prospection is embedded in a lot of our work. So I want to tell you about an experiment that we run at the lab from time to time. So we have gathered together groups in workshops. And one of the things that we do is we ask everyone, so picture a workshop with 15 people, sometimes as many as what we have here in this room. We bring people together and we say, all right, take a few minutes and we want you to dream of a trip you would love to take. Money, it's no object, and be as specific as you can. So we give them a few minutes to write that trip down. And someone's trip might look something like this. So this person says they're going to fly to London. They know who they're going with. In this case, they're going with their husband. And they're going to learn a little bit more about their family history. And they'd like to drink at pubs. And they would like to go to one of Gordon Ramsay's restaurants. So people define a very specific trip that they would love to take. Next thing we do is we ask them to pair up. So 2 different people have designed trips, right? We ask them to pair up and we say, all right, now we need you to work together and create a composite trip. But this trip can only have the things that both of your first trips have in common. Follow me? Okay? So it's really kind of entertaining to see what they come up with. because often their trips are very different, okay? So you get these very, vague kinds of trips. So we will travel to Europe. Okay, same continent. They have that in common, right? They're going with people that they love. All right, we can do that. And they're going to drink alcohol. So you hear trips like that. All right, we take it another step. We say, all right, this pair that just designed this dream trip, you pair up with another pair. So now we've got groups of 4 people. And we say, all right, now it's your turn, the 4 of you, to design a composite of your composite. And again, it can only have in common, it can only have the things that both of your composite trips have in common. So, it looks like this. Yeah, we're going to leave home. Sometimes it's not even that, because somebody has designed a staycation, and yeah, you just get nothing. So there's another step in this exercise that I haven't told you about yet. So after we ask people to design that first trip, kind of a solo trip all on their own, we also say, we would also like you to define your success criteria. Tell us, when you come back from vacation, how will you know that it was successful? And describe that in somewhat general terms. So here's an example of what this person said, okay? So then we ask them to pair up one last time. So this is a new pair. So we say, pair up with someone that you haven't been paired up with before. And this time, we want you to design a brand new trip, one that allows you both to fulfill your success criteria, okay? And so that kind of trip can look like this. So it looks not anything much like either of the 2 original trips, but it's a brand new trip that they've developed because of their success criteria. So at each of those stages, we ask them to evaluate their level of excitement on the trips that they're designing. So as you might imagine, that solo trip, I mean, if there are no constraints and money's not an object and you can design it yourself, you're going to give it a high rating. I'm still confused why it's 9.9 instead of 10, but so really high rating. So you remember that composite of the composite, so where it gets a little bit more vague? Well, that drops down a lot, as you might expect. And then the composite of the composites, so the 4 people design that trip together, well, it drops down even more to a 3.9. But look what happens for that 4th trip, the one that they design with their joint success criteria. It goes back up almost to the same level as their original trip. So it's a different trip, but it's a highly exciting and satisfying trip. So that's prospection at work. And it's not just prospection in one person's mind, it's a prospection in this case, 2 people's mind. So a lot of times when we think about collaboration, we think about working together, we have a situation where people have this image of the future or the outcome that they want in their minds, and we try to get them to compromise. Well, prospection is important, and prospection is something that we've embedded into one of the disciplines that we teach, and we call it strategic doing. So strategic doing has 10 rules, and these are rules that we see that are at work in most successful complex collaboration. And in your bag, you've got one of these, and you can see all of the 10 rules here, but I just want to concentrate on one of them as we finish up today. So rule 7, our rule 7 says, we convert strategic opportunities that we've identified together to strategic outcomes with success characteristics and metrics. So we use prospections to drive conversations deep enough so that if 2 or more parties can agree on what success looks like, so what the trip's going to look like when we come back and we say we know that it's going to be successful, and how we can measure it, you're well on your way to a collaboration that's going to be sustainable. So if you've ever been involved in strategic planning, sometimes you may have seen a different way to reach consensus. We like to do vision statements, right? Anyone worked on a vision statement before? So vision statements usually get purposefully vague, all right? We try to make them so vague that everyone kind of fits under this big umbrella. So we did another bit of research at our lab. We looked across the country and said, how many communities have developed a vision statement with this phrase? Something like, we will be a great place to live, work, and play. We stopped counting at 160, okay? So my question is this: how does that drive anyone to prospection? Does that mean the same thing to everyone? My guess is that you ask 100 people what this is a great place to play means, and you'll probably get 100 different answers. So when we drive people to have a discussion about outcomes and how we would measure them, we ask these kinds of questions. What would it look like if we're successful? How would it feel? Whose life would be different? And if you can drive a conversation, whether it's with two people or whether it's a large group, if you can drive that conversation deep enough, what people are doing is they're co-creating that future together. And they will have group prospection. And our research indicates that when you have group prospection, well, the group strengthens their resolve to make that future happen. So, to finish up, remember those 75,000 pages of functional specifications? There was no prospection going on because that was done by the leadership. They pushed it to the rest of us. And there are more reasons why that project failed, but I think that that's one of them. In the community that I talked about, where we saw remarkable transformation, well, it was much more of a blank slate. I mean, I was literally in front of blank flip chart paper. So people were pre-feeling, pre-thinking, pre-experiencing what the next iteration of that community might be. So our last kind of lesson to be learned here is that as leaders, we are tempted to have a vision and get everyone to line up behind us so that they can support our vision. Well, that's not a very sustainable way to get collaborations moving. Yes, you have your vision of the future, but they have their vision as well. So what we need to do is we align those visions by asking those kinds of questions. What will it look like? How will it feel? How will life be different? So the road toward change, a changed future for communities and organizations is a wide one. And we can kind of walk side by side, and we can figure out together what that future looks like. We can figure out together what that future is going to feel like, and we can have better futures together. Thank you.